Effective communication is good for a company's business in three specific ways. Now, first of all, it adds value to the company's brands. Brands are actually worth more. They can command a higher price. They can command a higher margin if the company's reputation enhances the value of the brand. We know this from years of research. We know it from looking at companies such as Johnson & Johnson in a competitive marketplace. And we know it from the experience of companies like Unilever, which, remember, for a long time were invisible, and in the end decided there was a commercial imperative to have a corporate brand as well, because it was so important to the value of the retail brands. So effective communication adds value to brands. The second thing effective communication does is it insulates companies from the troubles of life. There will inevitably be problems in a company's life, and the stronger its reputation, the more resilient it will be, and to be blunt, the cheaper it will find it to deal with those problems. The third way effective communication really matters is permission to do business. And in the society we live in, every company relies on its permission to do business. This is granted by society as a whole. It's a somewhat ethereal concept, but you can actually prove that there's some combination of business action, of civil society attitudes that gives a company permission to do business, and its reputation is integral to that. I'm not at all clear that these distinctions between communication and marketing are terribly helpful. I mean, they may serve an internal purpose, it may be a useful way to divide up the budget, but it's absolutely clear that good communication makes marketing much easier and much more cost-effective. Similarly, it's clear that if you don't build on a good reputation, if you don't build on a sound communications program with marketing, you miss a lot of opportunities. So I'm not sure the distinction matters much. Reputation does have to be earned. There are many companies that act responsibly, that are good citizens, that are parts of their communities, that fail to communicate that. So communication, a spin campaign, is never a substitute for good corporate citizenship. But good corporate citizenship needs to be carefully communicated. And so there's a strong relation between the two. And if you look at the companies that have consistently built value for their corporate brands, that have consistently empowered their marketers, those are companies which have done both. They've been good corporate citizens, and they've found effective, subtle, acceptable ways to talk about their good corporate citizenship. When companies don't communicate, in the best case, nothing happens. In the best case, they lose a few opportunities, they lose a bit of margin, they charge a bit less than they might otherwise, because customers look at the company and say, who are they? Are they worth paying for? In the worst case, disaster happens, because the company encounters some problem, justified or not. There's a claim made that the company has acted irresponsibly. There's some misfortune on the company's premises. And then people say, well, we don't know these people, so of course we don't trust anything they say. That's the point at which disaster really strikes. So in the best possible world, not communicating is just a lost business opportunity. In the worst possible world, not communicating is the end of your corporation. There's no doubt that over the past 20 years, corporate communications has been completely revolutionized. 20 years ago, within a company, there was probably a press officer. I know of one Fortune 100 company that had a policy of never speaking to the media under any circumstances, and that was possibly not best practice, but acceptable 20 years ago. Today, that would be negligence. Today, if any board tolerated that, you would have to ask whether the board were really fulfilling their functions, and any management that didn't have an effective board-level communication strategy in place would, I suspect, not survive very long. So we have seen an enormous change in corporate communications, and it's a change that's been driven by an assessment of the value of corporate communications. Remember that most big international companies are carrying on their books a nominal value for the corporate brand. Now, that nominal value, one, has to be justified, and two, has to be reassessed. If you fail to support it, you fail to nurture the brand, you actually have to show in the books that the value of the brand has declined. That's a reasonable thing to do, by the way. I mean, we know that these nominal accounting figures have a relationship to real life. So corporate communications has been revolutionized, and appropriately. I don't think you can have a different mindset for crisis communications and for corporate communications. Good corporate communications makes crisis communications much easier. And similarly, crisis communications informs some of what corporate communications needs to be. If you know, for example, that you're a company operating in an area which is very sensitive, a company like Eskom operating in an area absolutely critical to the success of the economy, you know that there will be periodic crises. You know that you have to invest more in the company brand than you might do were you working in some obscure backwater of the economy, which no journalist is going to be interested in. Similarly, you have to be sure that when the time comes to activate a crisis response, you can rely on a sound, continuing professional program of corporate reputation building as the bedrock on which you rest your crisis efforts. Put very simply, you turn to journalists, you say, we're the people you talk to all the time. Do you think we've started lying to you now? I think the most difficult issue I've ever had to deal with in corporate communications was one that also taught me an extremely valuable lesson. We were working for people who manufactured disposable nappies. And at the time, we were working on an environmental program because disposable nappies are very difficult to justify environmentally. Suddenly, we were dealing with a product tampering incident, an alleged product tampering incident. Someone claimed to have put ground glass into the disposable nappies. Actually, it hadn't happened, and we were able to contain it over the course of about 4 weeks. We managed to get sales back up to normal again. We took a very important strategic decision early on. The strategic decision we took was never to brand the crisis management. So we did the sort of opposite of the famous Tylenol case. We made every issue as generic as we could. We said, you know, it's not the company's interest that matters here, it's the interests of the mothers and the babies using disposable nappies. Whenever anybody tried to ask us a company question, we always turned it back to a nappy safety question. Whenever we put forward spokespeople, we put forward pediatricians and safety experts. We put forward people who could give consumer advice. And when we were forced in the end to do something for financial journalists, we did it at 5 p.m. At 5 p.m. on a Friday evening in a pretty remote corner of the UK, in the sure and certain knowledge most of them wouldn't turn up, but couldn't say they hadn't had an opportunity. The payoff came a year later. We commissioned market research, and we asked which nappy brand had the problem. Now, our client was second in the market at the time of the problem, and at this time it had roughly a 28% share. Market leader was Procter & Gamble, who had about a 48% share. A year on, we said to people, do you remember the crisis? Over 90% of mothers remembered it. We said, which brand do you think it was? And about 60% of mothers thought it was the leading brand. So I learned a very valuable lesson, which is if you're not the leading brand in a marketplace, your interest is to make the issue as generic as possible, as fast as possible. I suppose the most innovative corporate communications campaign I've been involved in was a quite unusual challenge. We were working for a small pharmaceutical company, a small Israeli pharmaceutical company, who had not deliberately annoyed people, but they'd been very culturally insensitive to Western Europe. So they behaved with Western Europeans as if they were Israelis, and I thought they were being honest and straightforward and upfront about things. The Western Europeans had perceived what had happened as being brusque and offhanded and rude. And so we started at a point where all the research we did suggested their corporate reputation was at absolute rock bottom for a series of very unfair reasons. The temptation was to start to rehabilitate the company immediately, to try and say you've